Chapter 1, Part 3, of the Colored Patriots of the American Revolution, by William Cooper Nell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by the Progressing America Project. The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. Chapter 1, continued. Massachusetts. Primus Hall, a native Bostonian, was the son of Prince Hall, founder of the Masonic Lodge of that name in Boston. Primus Hall was long known to the citizens as a soap boiler. Besides his revolutionary services, he was among those who, in the War of 1812, repaired to Castle Island, in Boston Harbor, to assist in building fortifications. The following anecdote of Primus is extracted from Godey's Lady's Book for June, 1849, to which it was communicated by the Reverend Henry F. Harrington. Quote, "Throughout the Revolutionary War, Primus Hall was the body servant of Colonel Pickering, of Massachusetts. He was free and communicative, and delighted to sit down with an interested listener, and pour out those stories of absorbing and exciting anecdotes, with which his memory was stored. Quote, It is well known that there was no officer in the whole American army whose memory was dearer to Washington, and whose counsel was more esteemed by him, than that of the honest and patriotic Colonel Pickering. He was on intimate terms with him, and unbosomed himself to him with as little reserve as, perhaps, to any confidant in the army. Whenever he was stationed within such a distance as to admit of it, he passed many hours with the Colonel, consulting him upon anticipated measures, and delighting in his reciprocated friendship. Quote, Washington was, therefore, often brought into contact with the servant of Colonel Pickering, the departed Primus. An opportunity was afforded to the negro to note him, under circumstances very different from those in which he is usually brought before the public, and which possess, therefore, a striking charm. I remember two of these anecdotes from the mouth of Primus. One of them is very slight indeed, yet so peculiar as to be replete with interest. The authenticity of both may be fully relied upon. Quote, Washington once came into Colonel Pickering's quarters, and found him absent. Quote, It is no matter, said he to Primus, I am greatly in need of exercise. You must help me to get some before your master returns. End quote. Quote, Under Washington's directions, the negro busied himself in some simple preparations. A stake was driven into the ground about breast high, a rope tied to it, and then Primus was desired to stand at some distance and hold it horizontally extended. The boys, the country over, are familiar with this plan of getting sport. With true boyish zest, Washington ran forwards and backwards for some time, jumping over the rope as he came and went, until he expressed himself satisfied with the exercise. End quote. Quote, Repeatedly afterwards, when a favorable opportunity offered, he would say, Come, Primus, I am in need of exercise. Whereat the negro would drive down the stake, and Washington would jump over the rope until he had exerted himself to his content. Quote, On the second occasion, the great general was engaged in earnest consultation with Colonel Pickering in his tent, until after the night had fairly set in. Headquarters were at a considerable distance, and Washington signified his preference to staying with the Colonel overnight, provided he had a spare blanket and straw. Quote, Oh yes, said Primus, who was appealed to. Plenty of straw and blankets, plenty. End quote. Quote, Upon this assurance, Washington continued his conference with the Colonel until it was time to retire to rest. 2 humble beds were spread, side by side, in the tent, and the officers laid themselves down, while Primus seemed to be busy with duties that required his attention before he himself could sleep. He worked, or appeared to work, until the breathing of the prostrate gentlemen satisfied him that they were sleeping, and then, seated himself upon a box or stool, he leaned his head on his hands to obtain such repose as so inconvenient a position would allow. In the middle of the night, Washington awoke. He looked about, and descried the negro as he sat. He gazed at him a while, and then spoke. Primus, said he, calling, Primus. Primus started up and rubbed his eyes. What, General? Said he. Washington rose up in his bed. Primus, said he, quote, What did you mean by saying that you had blankets and straw enough? Here you have given up your blanket and straw to me, that I may sleep comfortably, while you are obliged to sit through the night." "It's nothing, General," said Primus. "It's nothing. I'm well enough. Don't trouble yourself about me, General, but go to sleep again. No matter about me. I sleep very good." "But it is matter, said Washington earnestly. "I cannot do it, Primus. If either is to sit up, I will. But I think there is no need of either sitting up. The blanket is wide enough for two. Come and lie down here with me." "Oh no, General," said Primus, startling, and protesting against the proposition. "No, let me sit here. I'll do very well on the stool." "I say, come and lie down here," said Washington authoritatively. "There is room for both, and I insist upon it." He threw open the blanket as he spoke, and moved to one side of the straw. Primus professes to have been exceedingly shocked at the idea of lying under the same covering with the commander-in-chief, but his tone was so resolute and determined that he could not hesitate. He prepared himself, therefore, and laid himself down by Washington, and on the same straw, and under the same blanket, the general and the negro servant slept until morning." End of chapter 1, part 3.